The fall of empires usually begins with the thunder of artillery or the signing of a treaty. But the end of the Russian Empire in the Caucasus is beginning with something much quieter, much more personal, and infinitely more terrifying for the Kremlin: the failing pancreas of one man. For 2 decades, Vladimir Putin has outsourced the stability of Russia's most volatile region to Ramzan Kadyrov. He bought peace with billions of dollars and granted Kadyrov absolute power to run Chechnya as his personal fiefdom. But biology does not accept bribes. According to explosive reports from Novaya Gazeta Europe and confirmed by sources cited in Charter 97, the Padishah of Grozny is dying. This is not a rumor. This is not Western propaganda. The diagnosis is pancreatic necrosis. It is a brutal, relentless condition where the organ digests itself. The reports indicate that Kadyrov was hospitalized at the presidential administration's Central Clinical Hospital in Moscow in critical condition. His kidneys have failed. His lungs are struggling. The bloated face you see in his recent propaganda videos is not a sign of health. It is a symptom of massive hormonal therapy and organ failure. The MRI scans reportedly show that his brain is already affected by encephalopathy. The man Putin trusts to hold the gates of hell closed is no longer fully there. Why does this matter? Because the entire Russian architecture in the North Caucasus is not built on institutions, laws, or the constitution. It is built on personal loyalty to Kadyrov. Without him, there is no system. There is only a vacuum. And in the brutal politics of the Caucasus, a vacuum is always filled with blood. The Kremlin knows this. That is why they are panicking. While Russian soldiers die in the trenches of Ukraine, the real existential threat to Russia's territorial integrity is lying in a VIP hospital bed, gasping for air. The sharks are circling. As Kadyrov's grip weakens, the war for the throne has already begun in the shadows. The Kremlin is desperately auditioning successors, trying to find a man who can control the uncontrollable. Leading the pack in Moscow's eyes is Major General Abdi Alaudinov. Commander of the Akhmat Special Forces fighting in Ukraine, Alaudinov is the Kremlin's golden boy. He speaks perfect Russian, he wears a suit as comfortably as a uniform, and he projects the image of a disciplined federal officer. Moscow recently appointed him to a high-ranking position in the Ministry of Defense, signaling him as the chosen heir. But there is a fatal flaw in this plan. In Chechnya, being Moscow's favorite is not a badge of honor, it is a target on your back. The local clans, the TRIPPs, view Alaudinov as an outsider, a Fed, a man who spends too much time in TV studios and not enough time in the mountains. Then there are the brothers. Adam Delimkhanov, Kadyrov's cousin and brutal enforcer, holds the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard. Magomed Daudov, known as Lord, controls the parliament and the police. And let's not forget Kadyrov's own teenage sons, whom he is desperately trying to push into power, bestowing medals on them like candy. But dynastic succession requires respect, and in the Caucasus, respect is earned by blood and age, not by your father's decree. When Kadyrov's heart stops, these factions will not hold hands and sing the Russian anthem. They will draw their knives. The Rosgvardia units loyal to Kadyrov, the Kadyrovtsi, are a private army of tens of thousands. Who will they obey? Delimkhanov? Alaudinov? Or will they split into warring warlord bands? The scenario of a civil war inside Chechnya is not just possible, it is probable. And this time, Russia does not have the 100,000 troops it used in the 1990s to restore order. Those troops are currently bleeding in the Donbass. Instability is contagious. If Chechnya cracks, the shockwaves will shatter the entire North Caucasus. Look at Dagestan. It is already a powder keg. Just months ago, we saw anti-Semitic mobs storming the airport in Makhachkala, looking for Jews in airplane engines. We saw terror attacks on churches and synagogues. This was a massive intelligence failure by the FSB. Dagestan is diverse, fragmented, and teeming with radical Islamist underground cells that have been waiting for Russia to weaken. ISIS-K is watching. The perpetrators of the Crocus City Hall attack had links to this region. If the Kadyrov regime collapses, the Caucasus Emirate ideology could rise from the ashes. Neighboring Ingushetia is also boiling with resentment over land grabs by Kadyrov. For years, Grozny has bullied its smaller neighbors. Without Kadyrov's intimidation, Ingushetia will want its land back. The Kremlin is facing a nightmare scenario. A multi-front insurgency in its own territory, while fully committed to a high-intensity war in Ukraine. Putin cannot fight two wars. He will have to choose: save Crimea or save the Caucasus. While the North is facing biological and political collapse, the South has already made its choice. The story of Armenia is the story of the most spectacular diplomatic failure in modern Russian history. For 3 centuries, Armenia was Russia's fortress, its unsinkable aircraft carrier in the South Caucasus. Today, that fortress is opening its gates to NATO. The turning point was the fall of Nagorno-Karabakh. When Azerbaijan launched its lightning offensive to reclaim its territory, Armenia called Moscow. The phone rang, but nobody answered. The Russian peacekeepers stood by and watched as the Armenian separatist project was dismantled in 24 hours. In that moment, the trust that bound Yerevan to Moscow evaporated. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has effectively frozen Armenia's participation in the CSTO, Putin's version of NATO. But the insults go deeper. Pashinyan refused to sign CSTO declarations. He refused to host drills. Instead, he did the unthinkable. He invited U.S. troops for the Eagle Partner joint exercises on Armenian soil. American boots on the ground, in Russia's backyard. The Kremlin is furious. Top propagandists and allies are openly threatening Armenia with the Ukraine scenario. They suggest invading Armenia to overthrow Pashinyan. They threaten to cut off gas supplies. But Armenia is calling their bluff. They are buying radars and artillery from France. They are hosting EU monitoring missions on their border. They are diversifying their energy supplies. As reports from Haber Rus and Radio Free Europe indicate, Armenia is prepared to leave the Eurasian Economic Union if it opens a path to the EU. Russia is losing its oldest ally, not to a war, but to sheer incompetence and betrayal. While Russia rots and Armenia pivots, one power has risen to fill the vacuum with absolute confidence: Azerbaijan. Under President Ilham Aliyev, Baku has played a masterclass in geopolitics. They used Russia's weakness in Ukraine to settle a 30-year conflict by force, dissolving the separatist entity in Karabakh with an iron fist. But Azerbaijan is not just a military power, it is an energy superpower. As Europe turns off the tap on Russian gas, they are turning to Azerbaijan. Baku has become the indispensable partner for the West. And here is the irony: even Russia needs Azerbaijan now. With Western sanctions choking Moscow's trade routes, Russia needs the north-south corridor through Azerbaijan to reach Iran and India. This gives Baku immense leverage. They hold the keys to Russia's economic lifeline. And look at the new reality of the Caucasus: pragmatism over ideology. Reports confirm that Azerbaijan has begun exporting fuel to Armenia via rail transit. Two nations, technically still enemies, are trading. Why? Because business is business, and neither of them wants Russia to be the middleman anymore. They are cutting out the Kremlin. Now, let's talk about the final nail in the coffin: the project that will erase Russian influence from the region forever. They call it the Zangezur Corridor. But in the corridors of power in Washington and Ankara, a new name is being whispered: the Trump Bridge. The plan is audacious: a direct logistical link connecting Turkey to Azerbaijan, and by extension, NATO to Central Asia, bypassing both Russia and Iran. But here is the twist, reported by insider sources. The security of this corridor might not be handled by Russian FSB border guards, as Moscow demands. Instead, the proposal on the table involves a private American company, a PMC, providing security and logistics management. Imagine the scenario: a strategic trade route on the border of Iran, managed by a U.S. firm, facilitating trade between two NATO allies, Turkey, and partners. Prime Minister Pashinyan, desperate to get rid of the Russians, is reportedly open to outsourcing the management of the corridor to a neutral or Western third party. This would generate billions in transit fees for Armenia and integrate it into the global economy, sealing its pivot to the West. If the Trump Bridge becomes a reality, the map changes forever. The middle corridor from China to Europe becomes the dominant trade route. Russia is bypassed. Iran is sidelined. Turkey becomes the logistical superpower of Eurasia. Step back and look at the map. Look at what Vladimir Putin has achieved in his quest to restore the empire. In the west, he has united NATO and lost half his fleet in the Black Sea. In the north, he has turned the Baltic Sea into a NATO lake. And now, in the south, the buffer zone that protected Russia for centuries is gone. The North Caucasus is on the verge of a biological and political explosion with Kadyrov's impending death. The South Caucasus has been taken over by the Turkey-Azerbaijan axis, with Armenia inviting the Americans in. The Russian peacekeeper is leaving, dragging his boots, humiliated. The scenario we are looking at is not just influence loss, it is a geopolitical catastrophe. Imagine a 2026 where Chechnya is in civil war, Dagestan is in revolt, US troops are training in Armenia, and Turkish trucks are driving freely from Istanbul to the Caspian Sea via the Trump Bridge. Russia is being pushed back to its 17th century borders. The vacuum is being filled. The new masters of the Caucasus are not speaking Russian. They are speaking Turkish, English, and the language of raw power. But the biological collapse of Kadyrov has a direct, bloody consequence for the war in Ukraine. For 2 years, we have watched the so-called Akhmat Special Forces, the TikTok warriors, post videos from the safety of the rear lines in Donbass. They were Putin's barrier troops, his psychological weapon. But intelligence reports suggest a massive shift is underway. As Kadyrov lies in his hospital bed, commanders of these units are quietly receiving new orders. Pack up. We are going home. Why? Because in a succession crisis, power belongs to the man with the most guns inside Chechnya, not in Ukraine. Adam Delimkhanov knows this. Abdi Alaudinov knows this. If they leave their best fighters in Ukraine, they lose the throne in Grozny. We are about to witness a mass exodus of Chechen fighters from the Ukrainian front lines. This leaves a gaping hole in Russia's defense lines in the Donbass. Putin is facing a dilemma from hell. If he forces them to stay, they might mutiny. If he lets them go, the Ukrainian army will smash through the weakened sectors. The sickness of one man in Grozny is about to save lives in Kyiv. There is another player in this tragedy who is trembling just as much as Putin, the Ayatollahs in Tehran. For decades, Iran has used Armenia as a vital lung, a route to bypass sanctions and reach Russia and Europe. But the Trump Bridge, the Zangezur Corridor, is Iran's geopolitical nightmare come true. Look at the map closely. If this corridor opens under Turkish or American supervision, Iran effectively loses its direct border access to the geopolitics of the South Caucasus. They are cut off. Turkic world connects directly from Istanbul to the Caspian Sea, forming a wall across Iran's northern border. Tehran has threatened war to stop this. They have moved troops to the Aras River. But let's be realistic. Iran is weak, facing internal unrest and Israeli pressure. They cannot fight Azerbaijan, Turkey, and potentially American security contractors all at once. Russia, their traditional partner, is too weak to help. The realization in Tehran is bitter. They bet on Moscow to maintain the status quo, and Moscow failed. Now, both pariah states, Russia and Iran, are watching their influence evaporate as the West and the Turks shake hands on their borders. The collapse is not just on land, it is at sea. While Russia loses its grip on Armenia and Chechnya, it is desperately trying to cling to its last foothold in Georgia, Abkhazia. Satellite images confirm that Russia is frantically dredging the port of Ochumchiri in occupied Abkhazia. Why? Because Sevastopol in Crimea is no longer safe. Ukrainian sea drones and Storm Shadow missiles have turned the Black Sea Fleet into a collection of burning wrecks. Putin is retreating. He is moving his warships from the glorious Crimea to a tiny occupied port in Georgia. This is not expansion. This is a retreat disguised as strategy. But even here, they are not safe. The Georgian population is overwhelmingly pro-EU. Protests in Tbilisi against the Russian law showed that the people want Europe, not the Russian world. By parking his target-painted warships in Georgian territory, Putin is dragging Georgia into the war. He is turning the entire eastern Black Sea coast into a legitimate target for Ukraine. This act of desperation might be the spark that finally unfreezes the conflict in Georgia, opening yet another front that Russia cannot afford. And finally, the symbol of the end. the 102nd Russian military base in Gyumri, Armenia. For decades, this base was the guarantee of Armenia's existence. It was untouchable. Today, it is a hostage. Armenian officials are openly discussing the withdrawal of Russian border guards from Zvartnots airport. The next logical step, which analysts say is inevitable, is the termination of the lease for the Gyumri base. When, not if, that happens, the Russian soldier will physically leave the South Caucasus. Think about the magnitude of this. Since the time of Tsar Peter the Great, the Russian boot has been on the ground in this region. If the base in Gyumri closes, that era ends. Russia becomes a tourist in the region it once owned. They will lose their radar coverage, their intelligence hubs, and their ability to project power into the Middle East. History is cruel to the weak. And in 2026, Russia is the sick man of Eurasia. The biological clock is ticking for Kadyrov in the north. The diplomatic clock has run out for Putin in the south. The logistical clock is being rewritten by the Zangezur Corridor. The Kremlin thought it could freeze these conflicts forever. But the ice has melted. What emerges from underneath is a new Caucasus. One that doesn't look to Moscow for permission, protection, or prosperity. The Russian Empire is dying. And this time, there is no one coming to save